In this video, I'm going to be working with minimum values. There's this math function called math.min. It returns the smallest argument. However, I want to write a function and I'm going to name it min. It's going to take two arguments and then it's going to return the smaller of the two values. So I'm actually going to get started by trying to call that function. So I'm going to use the console.log function to try to call the min function. I want to keep in mind here, I haven't created the function, that min function yet. So let's just see what happens when I pass two arguments in to this function. I'm going to pass 2 and 4 in as an argument. I'll close both sets of parentheses and end the statement. Now when I run the program, it's no surprise to me, I'm being told that the function min has not been defined yet, so it's not actually working. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen, and this time I'm going to create a new function call, and I'm going to call this console.log, and I'm going to call in the math.max function. And just to keep in mind, this is a pre-made function that's provided to me, so this should work without having to create a function named max. So I'm going to pass in the same two values, and I'll close both sets of parentheses in the statement, and then I'm going to run this program. Well, this time I'm returning 4 as my maximum value, but when I go to call on that min function again, it's still telling me, hey, it hasn't been created, so tough luck. So I'm going to clear this screen, and I'm going to just change this up a little bit. I'm going to call on the math.min function. This is actually a function that has been created, so now it's pre-made and I don't have to try to make that program. I'm just going to receive the smallest value now when I click run on my program. So I returned 4 as my largest value, or the max value for the first function call, and 2 as my minimum value for the second function call. Alright, from here what I want to do, I'm going to clear the screen, and now what I want to do is just play around with this second function call. And what I'm going to do, well, console.log is going to call on the math.min function. I'm passing 2 arguments in. I'll return the smaller of the two values, which is 2, and then I'm actually going to add that to a new number. And I'm just going to write 98 here. So 2 should be returned and added to 98. So when I run the program, I'm getting 100 back as my return value because I'm adding 2 to 98. Alright, from here what I want to do is actually start building that min function. However, I'm actually going to call that min function one last time. Now min, I'm going to pass the same 2 arguments in and then close both sets of parentheses. When I call this, right now it's not working. I'm being told I need to define it. I need to create that function, and that's what I'm going to do. Now when you create functions, it's best practice to put the function at the top of your program. However, you can write it below, and that's actually what I'm going to do right now. I just want to see what happens when I create it on the fly below my function call right here. So to name a function, well actually to create a function, you're going to use the keyword function. You're going to name that function with the function's name. Well, the name of this function is min. And then, after that, you're going to open and close parentheses. Now, inside of the parentheses are going to be parameters that are passed in. So the parameters that are passed in here, it's pieces of data or information that the function takes. Now, right here, I'm calling them parameters. Parameters. But up above, when I was calling the min function, the values 2 and 4, I was calling these arguments. Now, arguments and parameters they're basically the same thing. They're interchangeable. However, arguments are used when you are being more specific and you're calling a function and passing in specific values. Parameters are more general, and that term's used when you're actually creating the function. So just know they're basically talking about the same pieces of information, but one, parameters, is for general terminology, and arguments are for specific events that are happening. So what I'm going to do now is just get rid of that word arguments and get rid of the word parameters. Parameters are the pieces of information that get passed in. Now the pieces of information that get passed in when I call the function are going to be the values 2 and 4. However, when I'm placing my parameters into the parentheses when creating the function, I'm going to use variables. I'm going to use the variable A, and I'm going to use the variable B. Now I could actually change these and make and write anything that I wanted here. I could write a person's name. I could write my name, Travis, and then another name I could write Nora, and it really doesn't matter. These are just variables that hold the place of the argument values that are going to be associated with those variables. So I'm going to go back to the variables A and B, those parameters, and these are what are getting passed into the function. So when I'm inside of my function, I'm actually going to open curly braces and close those curly braces. When I'm writing inside of my function, now I'm going to type in terms of A and B, and then 2 and 4 will substitute into the function later on. So I'm going to use an if statement here. So if my value for A is less than my value for B, then I want to do something. However, if it's not less than B, B is the larger value, then I want to do something else. So one nice thing about functions, one cool thing about them, is it has the option of returning something. You don't have to, but you can. And what I want to return here is the smaller of the two values. So if A is less than B, I'm going to return my value for A. However, if it's not, then I'll return the other value. I'll return B. Now I'm going to close that, or end that statement with a semicolon. And remember, I created this function on the fly. I created it after my function call. Let's see if it actually works. So I'm going to run the program. And absolutely, it sure did. After that 100, after that third function call, which added 98 to my minimum value, I am calling my min function, which is below. I'm passing 2 and 4 in as my arguments, and the smaller of the two values is being returned. 2 is being returned. Great. And now if I wanted to, I could change these values up. I could use the value 0, and I could use another value. I could write 10. Now if I want to run the function again, this time I'm returning 0 because it's smaller than 10. Great, so I'm going to clear this screen. I'm actually going to move this function to the top of my program, at the top of the code here, and I'm going to run through it again just to see that it's working. It's still working perfectly fine. It's just best practice to have your functions written at the top of your code. And now what I want to do is talk about how many times I can call on this function. Well, I have the option of calling it more than once. I don't have to just call it one time and then that's the end of it. That's the beauty of functions. You can call it or utilize it multiple times. So now I don't have to rewrite this code over and over and over again. So I'm going to call on the minimum function again, or not minimum function, the min function, and this time I'll pass 2 more values in. I'm going to pass in 0 as an argument and -10 as my second argument. So when I run the program this time, the first time I call on the min function, 0 is returned as my minimum value. However, the second time I call it, -10 is returned as my minimum value. Now you might be wondering, well, how many different values can you throw in to your function? Well, let's find out. Let's say I want to know what is smaller, or what's the minimum value between these 3 arguments, 0, 10, or -8. When I run the program, I'm going to clear out again. When I run this program, well, I'm still receiving 0 as my minimum value when I call the min function. But why is that happening? Well, if I look, I'm passing in 3 arguments, 0, 10, and -8, into the function call. However, when the function was created above, I only created or passed in 2 parameters. I passed A in as a parameter, which corresponds to 0 as my first argument. I passed B in as a parameter, which corresponds to 10 as my second argument, but I never passed in a third parameter, and that's what, if I want to actually compare all 3 values, then that's what I need to do here. I'm going to pass in a third parameter, and that parameter is going to be C, and then to be able to compare the 3, let's find out what happens now. So I'm going to run the program again. Again, I'm not surprised I'm still receiving 0 as my minimum value because I haven't done anything with the code inside of that function, and that's what I'm going to do now. So if I want to compare if A is the smallest of the 3 values, I'd write, well, if A is less than B, and if A is less than C, the value for C, then return A. However, if it's not, so I'm going to create an else if statement here. In fact, let's try this. I'm going to create another if statement. So, if B, this time I want to return B, if B is less than A and B is less than C, then return B. And finally, if the third value, C, is less than A and C is less than B, then return C. Okay, if I run this program now, this time I'm receiving -8 as my third, or as my smallest value. Now what's happening below? Well, I'm seeing the word undefined. Well, when I'm comparing my third, when I called on the min function the second time, I'm only comparing 2 values. However, when I'm running through the program, I'm trying to compare my values for A and B, with a third unknown value that hasn't been plugged in. Therefore, the nice thing about this, the program didn't crash, but therefore I am receiving a response of undefined because I haven't defined that third value. So if I actually plugged a third value in, say -4, clear the window, and run the program, now I'm seeing that -10 is still the smallest value in my second function call. Alright, so I'm going to clear the window again. Well, I'm looking at this if statement. It looks a little bit chunky and not so clean, so I can actually refactor this just a bit. And what I would do is I'd say, well, if this first condition is true, return A. However, if it's not, I'm going to write else if here, and I'm writing my second condition. If B is the smallest value, if B is smaller than A and C, then return B. And then finally, with this last one, I can get rid of all that code. I can say, if A is not the smallest value, if B is not the smallest value, it has to be C. Therefore, I'm just going to return C in the long run. Now, when I run the program, I still get the same results. This is pretty cool. All right. So the bottom line is I can call a function as many times as I want. I can pass in as many arguments or as few of arguments as I want into a function and return those values. However, this is still a little bit more than what the exercise was actually trying to get out. So what I'm going to do is just remove the unnecessary information and go back to the original exercise. And I'll get rid of C as an argument or a condition there. Remove my third values. And I'll try running the program one last time right after I remove that if statement. And now when I run the program, I'm seeing that 0 is the smallest value the first time I call on min as a function, and then -10 is the smallest value when I call on min the second time.